Hello. We are back with the interviews for the contributors for our Stygian Zine. I am back here with number two. We are here with Anna Quercia-Thomas today. So I am so happy to have you here with us. Do you want to start with a little introduction for yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm Anna Quercia-Thomas. I am a queer Hispanic American writer and academic. I write speculative fiction mostly. I write poetry, um, and I've been published kind of all over in lots of different literary journals and stuff.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Great. And then I keep forgetting to mention this, but
Mhm.
Anna is the writer of the poem Phosphenes, which
Mhm.
was featured in issue one. And Anna, would you like to start with reading the poem for us today?
Yes, I will do this now. All right. A hand reached through darkness, and for once you thought it might be shadows. To you, mountains on the skyline were bruises that faded with sunset, sparked a light again each time he called your name, and the sun rose to do the whole fucking dance over again. The grass crunched beneath your boots 1,000 times, and the light always turned, shook her head at your transgression with a gentle reminder not to touch the wildflowers along the path, no matter how rough the journey got. Fireworks him with stars overhead and 1,000 kaleidoscope pinpricks in your eyes, and you wished for a free hand to shield your face as you scrambled blindly over hills that rumbled with voices like his. Gently now, in the warmth of the sun, with the river lapping at the sides of its bank, reaching up to you with little arms in a quiet sort of warning. Sparks above you now, hunker down for nightfall, with your legs soaked to the shins and the nips of fish scales against cold fabric. Don't forget to hold your breath until the thunder passes by and you can think once again of safety. Fireworks him, a hand reached through darkness, and you turned away again.
Beautiful.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much for that. It's such a beautiful poem. I
Mhm.
love the contrast in all throughout the poem between um, darkness and all of these really beautiful images of light. The
Mhm.
contrast there is
Mhm.
just great to me. So
Thank you so much.
yeah, so I was wondering if you wanted to talk us through the development of this poem from the start, from the initial idea, all the way up until the point where you felt it was finished and it was ready to send out.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I feel like the my like kind of conceptualization of the poem is like very silly and strange. You know, be like, oh yes, you write like a lot of speculative fiction, but like the initial inspiration from it was actually from, so I teach a creative writing class, and one of my students submitted something that had a typo in it. Like it was not intentional, but it said like fireworks hymn, which was like not grammatical in their assignment. But I was like, that is such a beautiful like statement. Like I didn't even know, like those two words just really like stuck out to me in this really like weird abstract way. So I really wanted to like use that for something. And then I had written another poem, and I kind of, that was about this theme, and I wanted to like continue it, um, which was kind of playing on like changeling children and like thinking about whether the children, like the Fae children who were brought into the human world, were like just as displaced from like the nature and the Fae societies that as like the human children were. So I was kind of like playing with this concept, and then kind of wrote a bunch of poems about like uh, human violence and like escaping violence through nature and stuff like that. So it had a very like kind of like fantasy-esque abstract background, but yeah, so I sort of wrote it, and I really liked the like fireworks hymn line, and then I was looking at like different kinds of light and like different like strange kind of like uncomfortable forms of light, and then I found like Phosphenes, which is like a medical condition where you like when you close your eyes and you still see like blotches of light, and that was very like fireworks esque. So I felt like I could like kind of combine them together. Yeah,
Hmm.
and then that kind of became the poem that it is now.
Great, thank you. And
Yeah.
that little bit, fireworks hymn that recurs
Mhm.
throughout the poem, and I
Mhm.
just loved that.
Oh,
Um,
thank you. Yeah.
yeah, because I
From
love,
my student accidentally.
yeah,
Yeah.
but then it's something that you turn intentional, and it's this very poetic experimentation with um, words and the parts of speech. Um, and I see that in like a bunch of my favorite poems
Mm.
and a bunch of my favorite writings. So
Mhm.
I really really love this poem. Um,
Thank you so much. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I love just
So,
like playing with yeah, with words and parts of speech and stuff like that. Like it's all about like yeah, just like changing stuff and seeing where it works.
so
Mhm.
when you're writing a poem, do you think about it more as something that is written, like you imagine words on a page, or do you imagine it spoken out loud?
I think definitely more I'm more on the written side. This poem isn't very like this, but I do really like to play around with like landscaping and use like the space of the page as I write um, often. So I think even when I'm not like doing that specifically, I think about it as a written object. But obviously, like it does matter, like how it sounds and the rhythm and stuff is more affected by maybe how it would be spoken, even if
Mhm,
it's just like how it's being read in your head or something.
mhm. And I'm very curious to hear your answer to this one because I didn't know that you teach creative writing, but I'm
Mm.
curious to know for you, and maybe what you tell your students. What is the mission of a good poem?
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah. I would say just to convey an emotion, like, which is the most like baseline thing. But I guess like what is fun about poetry is that we have so many more tools to convey like things like where you're going to pause, like how you're going to read the line, like you can use this space and the language so much more abstractly than in prose, and that kind of just allows you like a whole more like bigger range of emotion to express and like more abstract feelings and stuff like that.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. Because I think that with prose, you're still beholden to this set of expectations for rhythm and for the way that things are written, but poetry is a very hands off kind of art form where it is about expression, and it's to give yourself the freedom to kind of portrait these complicated feelings that are maybe too complicated for prose.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think I'm like the kind of prose that I like best is prose that like allows itself to like break down in the same kind of ways. So
Hmm.
yeah, definitely.
So you had said that you write speculative fiction. I wanted to
Mhm.
ask if you could talk to us a little about, if anyone hasn't read your speculative fiction, what will they see and what can they expect from that?
Ooh, okay. Yes. I actually just published a short story in Overland Journal, so like people can look at that if they want to. But I that's maybe the only like kind of longer form speculative piece that I have published right now, but hopefully there'll be more in the future. Um but yeah, I feel like speculative fiction is this very broad category, right? Like it can kind of just mean like any sort of genre of fiction. But I really like kind of a more like I don't know broad definition of the term where we can think of it as like using these kind of abstract non-real because I don't know that's a strange definition because like what is reality anyway like maybe but like use these kind of distanced places and times and genres to like feel out and think and experience our like current reality, and maybe that's like a better and more realistic portrayal of the things that we're experiencing and feeling and stuff like that. um but yeah, I tend to like kind of like vaguely historical, vaguely I don't know, vaguely genre, and which I mean, like maybe I'll use like some fantasy elements or some sci-fi elements, but I'm not like hugely like, writing a high fantasy piece or something. Yeah, and like I don't know if I said in my bio, but like kind of like to focus on like just like the connection between people and like intimacies and stuff, like in these kind of like dark, oppressive settings, because that's like I don't know, kind of the world we live in anyway. Yeah. Mhm.
Cool. Interesting.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and then you were talking about these themes of human connection, about connection in dark times. Um,
Mhm.
do you feel um, do you feel a connection to a reader who reads your writing, and what's that connection like to you?
Oh, that's such a good question. I don't know. I feel like a lot of readers read things very differently, and like the people that I know, or it's like, if a friend is reading something, then they'll come back and tell me about it. Then that's like really nice, and I feel very like loved, and I'm like, oh yeah, you see, you like we're on the same wavelength, we were telling the same story. But also I've had people like, just as is the case like with anything published, like people read something really differently, or they like had a really different take or something, which can be both good and bad, because I really like stories, like both to read and write, where like you kind of give the reader a lot of space to think, because I feel like that's just kind of, you can tell a better story that way if someone's like processing it themselves, bringing their own experiences to it and stuff. But sometimes that leads me to be like, oh wow, like this reader really had a totally different like view of what I was doing. Um, but that's not necessarily bad. Like I've never had someone like come away with like the opposite idea of what I was trying to do or something. Yeah, I don't know if that's really an answer, but yeah.
Yeah. No. Um, if I can add on to that, with the last interview that I did for the series, that was with Andre Narbonne, who was also a writing instructor. And
Mhm.
I think that he said this to me after we stopped recording, but I'm sure he won't mind if I just say it. He told me that a rite of passage to him is when people who don't know you, like when strangers read your writing, like that's when you've
Mm.
kind of made it. Um, and I have been thinking about it a lot since then, and I think it's like what you're saying, that when they don't know you personally, then it's theirs to kind of do with as they wish. They don't feel any like responsibility to you. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and I think
Mhm.
that makes their interpretations just like a lot richer in some way.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Um, perfect. And then another thing that you like to write about is queer stories and queer
Yep.
romance. And I
Mhm.
can see a lot of the connection there, that it's in today's world with the way that things are right now, that telling stories about queer people lends itself a lot to um, connection in dark times, in
Yeah.
of dark times.
Mhm.
So what do you feel that queer stories are what do you feel that queer stories in general are missing right now that you want to try to bring?
Oh, that's such a good question. Well, I'm just gonna say there are a lot of like I think like queer fiction and queer stories that I love, like that do these things. But just in general, I think there is kind of this like oversaturation of stories about like, someone comes out and then their life is like fixed, and like that's the if that's the end of the story, it's like the whole thing. And maybe this that is kind of like a YA trope or like a younger stories trope, but like, and of course those kinds of narratives are important, but I also feel like they're a little bit damaging because like that, you know, that's just unrealistic. It kind of like ends the story at this point that's like not going to be the end for like any of the people reading them. So I feel like having stories about like not only just about like queer people kind of like doing stuff and living their lives and experiencing whatever it is they're going to experience like as they go on, like that is important, but I think like the idea of like queering narratives, like deconstructing like why is the narrative like the power structure of the narrative or like the linear cohesive whatever structure of the narrative, like why does it have to be this way or like why do we have to follow it in this certain like path, and like allowing like a story or a narrative to instead rest on like moments of connection or moments of like in the poem I wrote, like I feel like even like kind of this kind of deconstruction of the like human versus nature like binary is very like that to me is like a queer story as well. And I think that like representing those like cool deconstructions at the same time is also just having like a nice like intimate queer relationship is like those things go hand in hand because they're kind of doing the same work, even though like one is kind of this macro storytelling lens and one is like a character lens. Does that make
I mean,
sense?
yeah, definitely. Um, and thank you for that. Because that's something that's really interesting with queer stories. Um, and for anyone who doesn't know, queer stories, queer studies in, I think, more academic spheres has to do with the idea that because queer people are marginalized, that within queer thought there is this predisposition to deconstruct and to reanalyze. Yeah, and so we apply that to stories, we apply that to narratives, and it really does do a lot to provide a much richer commentary than these, um, like what you were saying before, when the story just kind of stops at the happily ever
Mhm.
after. So I,
Yeah,
mhm. So I totally support you in that. Um,
thank you. Yeah.
yeah, and I was going to ask, do you see your personal experiences or connections influencing your writing?
I mean, I think definitely yes, like just because I'm writing as me, but often or like very rarely do I ever set out to like intentionally depict something personal. Um I don't know. I maybe this ties into like writing from a queer experience because I feel like so many marginalized writers are kind of like put into this box of like you have to write about like your trauma or your identity in order to like get noticed or to get funding or something, which is like, and many people like doing that and like that is 100% valid. I just like personally I kind like I said I really like speculative fiction. Like I want to write like a strange story about like fae children. I don't need to write like a memoir. So like yes, my I'm sure my own experiences and my own connections like are at work just because it's coming from me, but I don't tend to like set out to portray those things, if that makes sense.
Definitely, and I can attest that if you're a queer person or a marginalized person anyway in the arts, it's only a matter of time before you start to be tokenized by people. So I think it's so important that we allow marginalized people to write art that is authentic to them, and that authenticity is whatever that person feels, um, like they would like to say, whatever it is they want to express. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. Um, so we were talking about your um, creative writing instruction with your
Mm.
students. Is there anything that you tell your students a lot that you would like um, other people to know?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know. Let me think. Like this is like kind of a cop out answer, but I
Mhm.
think a lot of what I find myself saying in these contexts is just go for it. Like if people are like worried about is not writing something the way that they see it in their head, or like they are worried about submitting somewhere or doing whatever, it's like just I feel like you just kind of have to do it, and then like maybe you fail but you like learn how to make it better from those contexts. um yeah, that might be a cop out answer, but I feel like that is a thing that I need to do more of as well, so yeah.
No, I agree. I agree. I think that's really important, especially
Mhm.
if you're just starting to study. If you're just starting out, then the output is a really important thing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and then do you feel like there's anything, any habits that successful students have? Um, yeah, any indicators of success for students who succeed in writing?
Yeah. Again, I feel like this is kind of a basic answer. One of them is kind of is reading. But I feel like a lot of the students, not just reading, but kind of just like consuming media and consuming stories and whatever kind of fashion they like, that is it just kind of important because it teaches you like what kind of stories you would like to tell, how you would like to tell them, like what different methods there are to like convey your feelings or your stories. Um, there's that one. I don't know, just also just kind of like playing around, like not like be trying different things, or like people who are like so tied down to like one way of writing or one form or something, like just trying out different methods
Hmm.
really unlocks stuff sometimes.
Yeah, um,
Hmm.
and that's a large part of the essence of creativity. I think is the willingness to try new things and be open to experimenting.
Yeah.
Um, are there any writers or poets or anyone across any art form that you feel is particularly influential in the way that you write, and in which ways do you see their which ways do you see their influence impacting your work?
Oh my god, that's a great question. Also, all these writers that I'm gonna list are like incredible, and they're like up here, and I'm like I'm just trying to crawl my way towards them. So I don't mean to say that I write like these people at all. But one of my like absolute favorite writers is Natasha Pulley. And I've just fairly recently been introduced to her, and I'm just kind of like reading everything she's ever written. Um and she writes like really beautiful, like mostly it's historical, but she actually just published like a futuristic sci-fi-ish book. But it's like historical fiction, like based on, I guess you would say it's a queer romance. It's most of them, but most of them are just kind of about like characters fighting to connect with each other in kind of like creepy alternate history worlds. And like often there is romance, but that's like, I don't know, it's just kind of like you read this like heartbreaking, beautiful historical story, and then you're like, by the end, you're like, oh my God, this was the most beautiful love story. And I didn't realize until I got to the end. Um, but she's just an amazing writer. Like the way she like builds worlds and like the language and like her like historical like knowledge and stuff. It's just so rich and beautiful. Um, so I love her. I'm trying to think, like one of my favorite, just this is just romance. Not that romance is like a lesser genre, but like KJ Charles writes like queer historical romance as well. She is an incredible writer, like very beautiful, like poetic writing. Also really like Cormac McCarthy, who is a modernist writer, and I just love how he will be like, "No, I'm gonna have like an entire page with no punctuation," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's art." Like it's not art if you understand the book, it's not art. Like yeah, but those are some of my favorite like writers and like styles and stuff.
Hmm.
I
Great.
definitely recommend Natasha Pulley though. She's an
Hmm.
incredible, incredible writer.
Definitely. Um, yeah, and I think when you use other writers, or like when you draw inspiration from other writers, you're kind of you're kind of setting them as a standard, and you're trying to meet that. But if you're your own standard, everyone is comparing themselves to you, you're doing great.
Oh, thank you, thank you. No, but yeah, but I wouldn't want to come out here and be like, yes, I write exactly like so and so or something. Like, not at all.
Yeah, I feel the same way. My big influences are Vladimir Nabokov and James Joyce, and that's just a level in the stratosphere that is kind of a joke if you're trying to reach that.
No, oh
Um,
my god, I did a draft of a query letter recently and put Wuthering Heights as a comp title, and everyone who read it was like, "You cannot have Wuthering Heights as a comp title. Like, this is not how it works." And I was
yeah,
like, "Okay."
yeah,
Yeah. Mhm.
great. So we are starting to come up to the end of our time here. Um,
Mhm.
So first thing that I have to do, I have to ask you if people want to see more of your writing or if they want to see what you're working on, where can they go?
Probably the easiest place is on Twitter. I'm Anna Q Thomas on Twitter and also on Blue Sky, the same username.
Hmm. And you talked a little bit about this, but what are you working on right now for the future?
Well, right now I am I've just finished my PhD, so I'm just trying like teaching a lot and trying to like get back into the non PhD life. But I am drafting a novel, and I'm drafting one novel and trying to figure out how querying works, kind of like putting my foot into that world for another novel. So I'm hoping to kind of get into writing longer form content because before I've only like the longest like prose stuff I had really done is short stories. So
Mhm,
I'm trying to enter the novel world is what I'm working on
mhm.
now.
Great. And it's going
Mhm.
to turn out great. We're all so excited to see where
Oh,
it's going to
thank you.
go.
Thank you.
Okay. We are just at the end of our time here. Thank you so much for coming to chat with us. We really appreciate it. Um, and thank you everyone for tuning in to watch. We will have a new interview coming out next month. And then at the Stygian Society, we're working on a whole bunch of really, really cool things right now. It's going to be a really big project coming out soon. And I hope everyone tunes in for that. You can find us on Instagram, on Facebook, and on X. Um, all the updates are going to be coming out there. You don't want to miss it. And thank you so much, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.